There is a place in the heart of Texas where the land rises and falls in gentle waves of limestone and cedar. The hills here are old, worn smooth by countless seasons of rain and wind, and the creeks that cut through them run slow and quiet beneath canopies of oak and pecan. In the summer months, the air hangs heavy with the scent of dry grass and warm stone, and the only sounds that reach you are the distant calls of mockingbirds and the soft rustle of leaves stirring in a breeze that barely moves. It is the kind of landscape that invites you to walk slowly, to let your thoughts drift, to notice the small details that might otherwise escape your attention. It was in this very terrain, sometime in the middle of the 1930s, that a man named Max Hahn set out for a walk with his wife. The exact date has been lost to the passage of years, as have so many small moments from that era. But what remains is the memory of what they found along the banks of Red Creek, not far from the tiny settlement of London, Texas. The town itself was hardly more than a scattering of homes and a general store. It's a quiet community where people knew one another by name and where the rhythm of life followed the seasons without hurry. Max and his wife were not searching for anything in particular on that afternoon. They were simply enjoying the warmth of the day, the feel of the earth beneath their feet, and the familiar beauty of the countryside they called home. The creek bed offered an easy path, its banks lined with rocks and pebbles tumbled smooth by the water. And it was along this natural walkway that something unusual caught their eye. Nestled among the ordinary stones, half buried in the sandy soil, was a rock that did not quite match its surroundings. What made this particular rock stand out was not its size or its color, though it was a brownish lump of stone that seemed unremarkable at first glance. What drew their attention was the fact that a piece of wood appeared to be protruding from within it. The wood was weathered and gray, worn by time, but it was unmistakably there, emerging from the rock as though it had been swallowed by the stone itself. It was a curious sight, the kind of small mystery that invites you to pause and wonder how such a thing could come to be. Max Hahn picked up the rock and turned it over in his hands. It was heavier than it looked, dense and solid, and the wood was firmly embedded within the surrounding stone. There was no easy explanation for what he was holding. Wood and rock do not normally combine in this way, and the appearance of the object suggested that whatever was hidden inside had been there for a very long time. He decided to take it home, thinking, perhaps, that one day he would crack it open and see what lay within. And so the rock sat, tucked away in a corner of the Hahn household for nearly a decade. Life continued, as it always does, with its daily routines and seasonal rhythms. And the strange stone from Red Creek faded into the background of everyday concerns. It was not forgotten, exactly, but it was not a priority either. There were crops to tend, neighbors to visit, and all the ordinary tasks that fill up the hours and days of a life lived close to the land. The rock waited, patient and silent, holding its secret inside. It was not until some years later, perhaps in the early 1940s, that someone in the family finally decided to break open the stone and see what was inside. The details of this moment are sparse, passed down through informal retellings rather than documented records, but the result was startling. When the rock was cracked apart, it revealed not just a piece of wood, but an entire hammer. Its iron head firmly attached to a wooden handle. All of it encased within the ancient-looking stone, as though it had been there since the beginning of time. The hammer was small, the kind of tool that might be used for light work, with a head that appeared to be made of iron and a handle that was partially transformed into a darker, almost coal-like substance. The craftsmanship was simple but effective, the work of someone who knew how to shape metal and fit it to wood. It looked, in many ways, like any number of hammers that might have been used by miners or craftsmen in centuries past. Here it was, wrapped in a cocoon of rock, and that impossible combination raised questions that no one could easily answer. How had a hammer come to be inside a rock? The stone itself appeared to be a type of limestone concretion, the kind of formation that takes shape over immense stretches of geological time. If the rock was truly ancient, then the hammer within it would have to be ancient as well, and that possibility opened up dizzying vistas of speculation. Could human beings have been making tools like this hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago? Could the accepted timeline of human history be fundamentally wrong? These were the questions that began to swirl around the London hammer as the object came to be known, named after the small Texas town near which it had been discovered. For the Hahn family, it was simply an unusual find, a curiosity to show visitors and puzzle over during quiet evenings. But in the decades that followed, the hammer would travel far beyond the gentle hills of central Texas, attracting the attention of researchers, skeptics, and seekers of hidden truths from around the world. The landscape where the hammer was found holds its own deep history, one that stretches back far beyond the arrival of human beings in the region. The rocks that make up the hills and creek beds of central Texas were formed during the Cretaceous period, a span of time that ended some 65 million years ago, when dinosaurs still roamed the earth and the continents were arranged in unfamiliar patterns. During that era, much of what is now Texas lay beneath a shallow sea, and the creatures that lived in those warm waters left their remains in the sediments that would eventually become limestone. To walk along Red Creek is to walk across the floor of that ancient ocean, now lifted high above sea level by the slow movements of the earth. The fossils of shellfish and sea creatures can still be found in the rocks, silent witnesses to a world that vanished long before the first humans ever appeared. It is a humbling thought. It's a reminder of how brief our time on this planet has been compared to the vast stretches of geological history that came before us. Yet, here was a hammer, a tool unmistakably made by human hands, apparently encased within the very same kind of rock that had formed in those ancient seas. Contradiction was striking, and it demanded some kind of explanation. Either the rock was not as old as it appeared, or the hammer was far older than anyone could reasonably believe. Or there was some other process at work that could account for the strange combination of the modern and the ancient. For those who first encountered the London hammer, the mystery was enough. It was a puzzle, a conversation piece, a reminder that the world is full of things we do not fully understand. But as the years passed and the hammer became more widely known, it would take on larger meanings, becoming a symbol in debates about the nature of history, the reliability of science, and the limits of human knowledge. It would be studied, photographed, displayed, and argued over, each new generation of observers bringing their own questions and assumptions to bear on this small, enigmatic object. But all of that lay in the future on the day when Max Hahn first picked up that curious rock from the banks of Red Creek. In that moment, there was only the weight of the stone in his hands, the warmth of the Texas sun on his shoulders, and the simple human impulse to investigate something that did not quite fit the expected pattern of the world. It is an impulse as old as our species, this desire to pick up the unusual stone, to turn it over, to wonder what secrets it might hold. And it is that impulse that would eventually carry the London hammer from an obscure creek bed in rural Texas to the center of a controversy that continues to this day. The hills around London, Texas, have not changed much since the 1930s. The oaks still spread their branches over the rocky soil. The creeks still wind their way through the limestone, and the summers still bring that same heavy heat that settles over the land like a blanket. If you were to walk along Red Creek today, you might find it easy to imagine Max Hahn and his wife making their way along the same path, pausing to examine the stones, enjoying the simple pleasure of a quiet afternoon. The rock they found that day is long gone from its original resting place, but the questions it raised remain. How did a hammer come to be inside a stone? What does that tell us about the history of the earth and the history of our own kind? And what are we to make of objects that seem to defy the categories we use to make sense of the world? These are the questions that have followed the London Hammer through the decades. Okay? And they are the questions we will explore together as this story unfolds. For now, let the image of that discovery settle into your mind. Picture the slow-moving creek, the scattered stones, the unexpected glint of wood emerging from rock. Picture the moment of curiosity, the decision to carry the strange object home, the years of waiting before the secret inside was finally revealed. It is a story that begins with a simple walk in the Texas hills, but it will take us on a journey through geology and history, through science and speculation, through the enduring human need to understand the world around us. And as you settle into the rhythm of this tale, let your breathing slow and your thoughts grow quiet. There is no hurry here, no urgency, only the gentle unfolding of a mystery that has waited nearly a century to be told. The hammer rests in its case now, far from the creek where it was found, but the questions it raises are as alive as ever. Let them drift through your mind like clouds passing across a summer sky, and let the story carry you forward, one word at a time, into the deep and fascinating history of the London Hammer. The night is long, and there is much more to discover. But for now, rest with the image of that Texas landscape, those ancient hills, that curious rock with its hidden treasure. The story has only just begun, and there will be time enough to explore every corner of this mystery before the dawn. Let the words wash over you like the waters of Red Creek, gentle and steady, carrying you toward sleep and toward understanding in equal measure. In the chapters that follow, we will travel back through the ages to understand the land where the hammer was found. We will examine the object itself in careful detail, considering what it can and cannot tell us about its origins. We will meet the people who have studied it, debated it, and displayed it for the world to see, and we will grapple with the larger questions that the London Hammer raises about how we know what we know and how we decide what is possible. But all of that can wait. For now, there is only this moment, this quiet space between waking and sleep, this invitation to wonder. The hammer was found, the rock was broken open, and a mystery was born. That is enough for now. That is more than enough. Let the story settle into your bones, and let the night carry you gently forward into dreams of ancient seas and Texas hills, and the small, strange objects that remind us how much we have yet to learn. To understand the mystery of an object found within stone, we must first understand the stone itself. We must journey backward through time, far beyond the reach of human memory, beyond the rise and fall of civilizations, beyond even the appearance of our earliest ancestors on this planet. We must travel to an era when the world looked nothing like it does today, when the continents drifted in unfamiliar arrangements across the face of the globe, and when the land that would one day become Texas lay submerged beneath the warm, shallow waters of an ancient sea. The geological story of Central Texas begins in the Cretaceous period, a span of time that stretched from approximately 145 million years ago to 66 million years ago. This was the final chapter of the age of dinosaurs, an era when the largest creatures ever to walk the earth roamed across vast continents, and when the skies were filled with winged reptiles gliding on warm currents of air. But in the region we now call Texas, the dominant presence was not the dinosaur, but the sea, a body of water so vast and so enduring that it left its signature written in the very rocks beneath our feet. This ancient ocean is known to geologists as the Western Interior Seaway, and at its greatest extent, it divided North America into two separate landmasses, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic Ocean. The waters were shallow and warm, teeming with life, and the creatures that lived and died in those waters left their remains scattered across the seafloor in unimaginable quantities. Over millions of years, those remains accumulated in thick layers of sediment, slowly compressing under their own weight, transforming through heat and pressure into the limestone that now forms the bedrock of the Texas Hill Country. If you could stand on the shores of that Cretaceous Sea and look out across its surface, you would see a world utterly unlike the one we know. The air would be warmer, the atmosphere richer in carbon dioxide, and the coastline would be populated by creatures that have no living descendants. Giant marine reptiles, called mosasaurs, prowled the deeper waters, hunting fish and smaller prey with powerful jaws lined with sharp teeth. Ammonites, those spiral-shelled relatives of the modern nautilus, drifted through the currents in countless numbers, their shells eventually becoming some of the most common fossils found in these ancient rocks. The seafloor itself was a carpet of life, covered with oysters, clams, and other shellfish that filtered nutrients from the water and built their shells from the calcium carbonate dissolved in the sea. When these creatures died, their shells accumulated in great drifts, mixing with the fine particles of mud and sand that washed in from the distant shores. Layer upon layer, century after century, millennium after millennium, the sediments piled up, bearing the remains of the past and creating the foundation for the future. It is difficult to grasp the timescales involved in this process. A single inch of limestone might represent thousands of years of accumulation, and the formations that make up the hills of central Texas are measured in hundreds of feet. The Edwards limestone, one of the most prominent formations in the region, was deposited over a period of several million years, and it now forms the backbone of the landscape. A vast reservoir of ancient seabed lifted high above the modern world by the slow but relentless movements of the earth. The forces that raised this limestone from beneath the waves are part of an even larger story. The story of plate tectonics, the gradual shifting of the great plates that make up the surface of our planet. As these plates move, colliding and separating over spans of time that dwarf human comprehension, they reshape the face of the earth, building mountains and opening oceans, raising ancient seafloors to become the peaks of hills and the floors of valleys. The Texas Hill Country owes its existence to these immense forces, which slowly tilted and uplifted the old seabed, exposing it to the erosive power of wind and water. Over the millions of years since the Cretaceous seas withdrew, the exposed limestone has been sculpted into the landscape we see today. Rainwater, slightly acidified by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, dissolves the calcium carbonate in the rock, carving out caves and sinkholes, cutting channels for creeks and rivers, shaping the gentle hills and rugged bluffs that characterize the region. The process is slow, measured in fractions of an inch per century, but given enough time, it transforms the land utterly, erasing some features and creating others in an endless cycle of destruction and renewal. The creeks that wind through this landscape, including Red Creek near London, Texas, are the agents of this transformation. They carry water and sediment from higher ground to lower, cutting ever deeper into the bedrock, exposing layers of rock that were deposited in sequence over millions of years. To walk along the bed of such a creek is to walk through time, each layer of stone representing a different chapter in the long history of the region. The fossils embedded in these layers tell the story of the creatures that once lived here, their forms preserved in exquisite detail by the same processes that turned their remains into stone. It is in this context that we must consider the rock that Max Hahn found along the banks of Red Creek. The stone that encased the hammer appeared to be a concretion, a type of geological formation that occurs when minerals dissolved in groundwater precipitate out and cement together particles of sediment around some central nucleus. Concretions can form relatively quickly in geological terms, sometimes in just a few decades or centuries, and they can take on a wide variety of shapes and sizes depending on the conditions under which they develop. The question of age is crucial to understanding the London hammer. If the rock surrounding the hammer is truly part of the ancient Cretaceous limestone, then its presence would indeed be inexplicable, a violation of everything we know about the history of life on Earth. But if the concretion formed more recently, wrapping itself around an object that was already present in the sediment, then the mystery dissolves into a much more ordinary explanation. The stone would be young, even if it appears old. And the hammer would be nothing more than a lost tool from some more recent era of human activity. Determining the age of geological formations is a complex endeavor, requiring careful analysis of the minerals present, the context in which they are found, and the processes that could have created them. Geologists use a variety of techniques to date rocks, including radiometric methods that measure the decay of radioactive isotopes, as well as relative dating methods that establish sequences based on the positions of different layers. This technique has its strengths and limitations, and in many cases, multiple lines of evidence must be combined to arrive at a reliable conclusion. The rocks of the Texas Hill Country have been extensively studied over the past century and a half, and their ages are well established within the framework of geological science. The Cretaceous formations that dominate the region are genuinely ancient, laid down in the shallow seas that covered this part of the world more than 65 million years ago. But the surface of the land is a dynamic environment. It's constantly being reworked by erosion and deposition, and younger materials are continually being added to the mix, even as older materials are exposed and carried away. Concretions, in particular, can form under a wide range of conditions and over a wide range of timescales. Some concretions found in ancient rock formations are themselves ancient, having formed shortly after the surrounding sediments were deposited. But others are much younger, forming in recent times as groundwater percolates through loose sediments and deposits minerals around whatever objects happen to be present. The appearance of a concretion can be deceiving, giving an impression of great age even when the formation itself is relatively new. This is a crucial point for understanding the London Hammer, and it is one that we will return to in greater detail as our story continues. For now, it is enough to recognize that the age of the encasing rock is not necessarily the same as the age of the object within it. A hammer dropped into a creek bed in the 19th century could, under the right conditions, become encased in a mineral concretion within just a few decades, creating an object that looks impossibly ancient, even though both the tool and its stone wrapper are products of recent times. The landscape of central Texas is full of such processes, working invisibly beneath the surface of the earth, transforming the familiar into the strange and the ordinary into the apparently miraculous. Springs bubble up from underground aquifers, depositing minerals in delicate formations of travertine. Caves grow and change as water dissolves the rock and redeposits it in new forms. And concretions develop around pebbles, fossils, and any other objects that happen to be in the right place at the right time, wrapping them in shells of stone that can endure for centuries or millennia. To walk through this landscape with an understanding of these processes is to see it with new eyes. Every rock tells a story. Every layer of sediment records a chapter in the long history of the earth. And every unusual formation invites us to ask questions about how it came to be. The London Hammer is one such formation. It's an object that challenges us to look more closely at the processes that shape the world around us and to resist the temptation to leap to extraordinary conclusions before we have fully explored the ordinary possibilities. The Cretaceous seas are long gone, vanished into the depths of geological time, but their legacy endures in the limestone hills of Texas. The creatures that swam in those ancient waters have left their fossils, scattered through the rock, silent witnesses to a world that existed tens of millions of years before the first humans walked the earth. And the processes that created those fossils, the slow accumulation of sediment, the gradual transformation of organic remains into stone, continue to operate today, though on timescales that are difficult for human minds to grasp. As you rest with these thoughts, let your imagination wander back through the ages to that vanished sea. Picture the warm sunlight filtering down through clear blue water, illuminating the shells and corals on the seafloor far below. Picture the great marine reptiles gliding through the depths, the ammonites spiraling through the currents, the endless rain of tiny particles drifting down to add another thin layer to the growing pile of sediment. This is the world that created the rocks of central Texas, and understanding that world is the first step toward understanding the mystery of the London hammer. The story we are telling is a story of time, of the unimaginable stretches of years that separate us from the Cretaceous seas, of the much shorter but still significant spans that separate us from the pioneers and settlers who made their homes in the Texas Hill Country in more recent centuries. It is a story of processes, of the slow work of water and minerals that can transform a lost tool into an apparent impossibility. And it is a story of questions, of the human desire to make sense of the world and the challenges we face when confronted with objects that do not fit neatly into our existing categories. The night deepens around you, and the ancient seas recede once more into the past. But their memory lingers in the rocks beneath our feet, in the fossils that tell their story, and in the strange concretion that once held a hammer in its stony grip. There is more to explore, more to understand, and the journey has only begun. Let the rhythm of the words carry you forward, steady and gentle, as we continue to unravel the threads of this enduring mystery. Rest now with these thoughts, and let the ancient seas carry you gently toward sleep. The limestone hills of Texas stand watch over the land, monuments to a world that vanished millions of years ago. And somewhere among them lies the place where a curious rock was once found along the banks of a quiet creek. The story continues, the mystery unfolds, and the night stretches out before us like an endless sea of stars. Let us now turn our attention to the object itself, this small and unassuming tool that has generated so much curiosity and debate over the decades since its discovery. To hold the London hammer in your hands, or even to study it through photographs and detailed descriptions, is to encounter something that feels both familiar and strange, a meeting of the everyday and the inexplicable that invites careful examination. The hammer is not a large or impressive tool by any measure. Its head is compact, weighing somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 pounds, and its overall length, including both head and handle, is less than a foot. This is not the kind of hammer that would be used for heavy construction or blacksmithing. It is a lighter instrument, suited for more delicate work, the kind of tool that a craftsman might reach for when precision mattered more than brute force. The head of the hammer is made of iron, a dark and dense metal that has been shaped with evident skill. It is rectangular in cross-section, tapering slightly from one end to the other, with one face that is flat and broad, and another that comes to a more narrow edge. This design suggests a tool intended for multiple purposes, capable of driving nails or pegs with its flat face and of shaping or splitting materials with its narrower end. The surfaces show signs of use, the marks and wear that accumulate on any tool that has seen real work over time. What makes the hammerhead particularly interesting to those who have studied it is the quality of the iron itself. Various analyses have been conducted over the years, some claiming that the metal is unusually pure, containing a high percentage of iron, with very few of the impurities that typically accompany iron produced through traditional smelting methods. Others have reported finding traces of chlorine in the metal, an element that is not commonly associated with iron production, and that has sparked speculation about unusual manufacturing processes or environmental conditions. The significance of these metallurgical findings is a matter of ongoing debate. Some have suggested that the purity of the iron indicates an advanced technology, a level of sophistication that would be unexpected in a tool of recent origin. Others have pointed out that the methods used to analyze the hammer have varied considerably, and that the results have not always been consistent or reproducible. The question of what the iron can tell us about the hammer's origins remains open, a thread in the larger tapestry of mystery that surrounds this artifact. Attached to the iron head is a wooden handle, and it is here that the strangeness of the London hammer becomes most apparent. The handle is made of wood that appears to be quite old, with a surface that has darkened and hardened over time. But more remarkable than its appearance is the condition of the wood itself. A portion of the handle, particularly the section that was most deeply embedded within the encasing rock, has undergone a partial transformation, taking on a texture and density that resembles coal more than ordinary wood. This process, sometimes referred to as coalification, occurs when organic material is subjected to heat and pressure over extended periods of time, driving out moisture and volatile compounds and leaving behind a concentrated residue of carbon. It is the same process that transforms ancient forests into coal deposits over millions of years, though it can also occur more rapidly under certain conditions. The presence of partially coalified wood in the hammer handle has been cited as evidence of great age, a sign that the tool has been buried long enough for this transformation to begin. Yet the interpretation of this coalification is not straightforward. While the process does typically require significant time, the rate at which it occurs can vary dramatically depending on temperature, pressure, and the chemical environment in which the wood is buried. Under the right conditions, wood can begin to show signs of coalification in just a few centuries, or even less. The partial transformation of the hammer handle is certainly unusual, but it does not by itself prove that the tool is ancient. It is another piece of the puzzle, suggestive but not conclusive, inviting further investigation rather than providing a definitive answer. The handle fits into the hammerhead through a hole, or eye, that was formed when the iron was shaped. This is a standard method of construction for hammers, one that has been used for centuries across many different cultures. The fit is secure, the wood swelling slightly within the eye to create a tight bond that holds the head firmly in place. There is nothing unusual about the method of attachment, nothing that would set this hammer apart from countless other tools made in the same way throughout human history. Surrounding both the head and the handle is the stone that first drew Max Hahn's attention along the banks of Red Creek. The rock is a nodule of what appears to be limestone, grayish-brown in color, and roughly the size of a large grapefruit. It is not a smooth or regular shape, but rather lumpy and irregular, the kind of formation that develops when minerals accumulate around a central object in an uneven fashion. The stone is dense and hard, requiring considerable effort to break apart, and it clings tightly to the hammer within, as though reluctant to give up its prize. When the nodule was first cracked open, it revealed the hammer embedded at its center. The wood and iron wrapped in a shell of rock that seemed to have grown around them like a cocoon. The interior surface of the stone, where it contacts the hammer, shows the impression of the tool's shape, a negative mold that records every detail of the object it once enclosed. This intimate contact between stone and tool is one of the features that has most puzzled observers, suggesting a long and gradual process of mineral accumulation rather than a sudden or artificial encasement. The composition of the encasing rock has been examined by various researchers over the years, with somewhat varying results. Most agree that it is a type of calcium carbonate concretion, formed when minerals dissolved in groundwater precipitate out and cement together particles of sitit around a central nucleus. Such concretions are common in many geological environments and can form around a wide variety of objects, from pebbles and fossils to more recent items like bottles, coins, and tools. One detail that has attracted particular attention is the presence of small shell fragments within the concretion, remnants of ancient marine life that seem to tie the rock to the Cretaceous formations of the surrounding area. If these shells are genuinely part of the concretion, they would suggest that the rock incorporates material from the ancient limestone of the region. Though this does not necessarily mean that the concretion itself is ancient. Younger concretions often form using material eroded from older rocks, mixing fragments of the deep past with minerals deposited in the present. The outer surface of the nodule shows the marks of weathering and erosion, the pitting and roughening that comes from exposure to the elements. This suggests that the concretion spent some time at or near the surface before it was discovered, subjected to the same forces of wind and water that shape all exposed rocks. The degree of weathering is difficult to interpret precisely, The rate of erosion depends on many factors, but it does indicate that the nodule was not freshly formed at the time of its discovery. To examine the London hammer is to encounter a layered mystery, each element of the object raising its own questions. The iron head speaks of skilled metalwork, but the nature of the iron itself remains debated. The wooden handle shows signs of transformation, but the pace of that transformation is uncertain. The encasing rock appears ancient, but the processes that created it may be more recent than they seem. In binding all of these elements together is the simple fact that they were found in combination, a hammer inside a rock, defying easy explanation. There is something almost meditative about contemplating this small object, turning it over in the mind as one might turn a stone in the hand. It is a reminder that the world is full of things we do not fully understand, phenomena that resist our categories and challenge our assumptions. The hammer asks us to look more closely, to question what we think we know, to remain open to possibilities that we might otherwise dismiss. It is a teacher as much as a mystery, inviting us to sharpen our thinking and deepen our appreciation for the complexity of the natural world. As you rest with this image, picture the hammer in your mind's eye. See the dark iron of the head, worn smooth by use, and the weathered wood of the handle, darkening where it meets the stone. See the rough surface of the encasing nodule, pitted and irregular, holding its treasure within. This is the London hammer, an object that has traveled from a quiet creek bed in Texas to the center of a debate that spans decades and continents, and it has lost none of its power to fascinate and perplex. The night continues its slow progression, and the mystery deepens with each passing moment. There is more to learn, more to consider, and the story has many chapters yet to unfold. But for now, let the image of the hammer rest quietly in your thoughts. A small and unassuming object that carries within it questions as old as human curiosity itself. The iron and the wood, the stone and the shell, all woven together in a puzzle that invites us to wonder at your breathing slow as you contemplate this artifact from another time. The details we have explored are the foundation for everything that follows, the raw material from which theories and explanations will be constructed. But before we reach for explanations, let us simply sit with the object itself, appreciating its strangeness and its simplicity, its ordinariness and its apparent impossibility. The hammer is what it is, a tool made by human hands, found in circumstances that continue to generate wonder and debate. The questions it raises will not be resolved tonight, nor perhaps ever to everyone's satisfaction. But there is value in the asking, in the careful attention to detail, in the willingness to consider multiple possibilities before settling on a conclusion. This is how knowledge grows, through patient observation and thoughtful analysis, through the accumulation of evidence and the testing of ideas. The London hammer invites us to participate in this process, to become investigators ourselves, to engage with a mystery that has captivated minds for nearly a century. And so, we leave the hammer for now, resting in its display case far from the creek where it was found, an object of curiosity and contemplation. The story moves forward, carrying us toward new questions and new insights. But the hammer remains at the center, the still point around which everything else revolves. It is a small thing, easily held in one hand, and yet it contains multitudes. Such is the nature of mysteries, and such is the nature of the objects that inspire them. For many years after its discovery, the London hammer remained a private curiosity, a strange object tucked away in the corner of a Texas home, known only to the Hahn family and the occasional visitor who happened to hear its story. It was a local mystery. It's a kind of tale that might be shared over a cup of coffee or mentioned in passing when conversation turned to the unusual things one finds in the countryside. But objects have a way of finding their audience, and in time, the hammer would travel far beyond the quiet hills where it was first discovered. The transformation of the London hammer from private curiosity to public phenomenon began in the 1980s, when the artifact came to the attention of a man named Carl Ball. Ball was a colorful figure in the world of alternative archaeology, a self-described creation scientist who had devoted his life to challenging the mainstream scientific consensus on the age of the Earth and the history of life. He believed that the evidence, properly understood, supported a young Earth and a literal interpretation of biblical creation, and he was always on the lookout for artifacts and anomalies that might support this view. Ball had founded the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas, a small institution dedicated to presenting what he considered evidence against evolutionary theory and conventional geology. The museum was located near the Biloxi River, a site famous for its dinosaur trackways and infamous for claims, disputed by mainstream scientists, that human footprints had been found alongside those of the ancient reptiles. It was a place where alternative narratives about the past were taken seriously, where objects that did not fit the standard scientific story were given pride of place. When Ball learned of the London hammer, he recognized its potential as a centerpiece for his collection. Here was an artifact that seemed to defy explanation, a human-made tool apparently encased in rock that was millions of years old. If the hammer was genuine, it would suggest that human beings had existed far earlier than conventional science allowed. Or, alternatively, that the rocks of central Texas were far younger than geologists believed. Either interpretation would challenge the mainstream view, and that was precisely what Ball was looking for. The hammer was acquired for the Creation Evidence Museum, where it became one of the star attractions. Ball presented it as evidence that the conventional timeline of Earth history was fundamentally flawed, that human beings had walked the Earth in ages far more remote than scientists were willing to admit. The rock surrounding the hammer, he argued, was genuinely ancient, formed in the Cretaceous seas that had covered Texas more than 65 million years ago. And if the rock was ancient, then the hammer within it must be ancient as well. It's a relic of a forgotten civilization, or perhaps even of the antediluvian world described in the book of Genesis. This narrative proved remarkably compelling to a certain audience. The idea that mainstream science might be wrong, that there were secrets hidden in the earth waiting to be discovered, that the past was stranger and more mysterious than the textbooks allowed. All of this resonated with people who were skeptical of scientific authority, or who held religious beliefs that seemed to conflict with conventional geology and paleontology. The London hammer became a symbol of resistance to the scientific establishment, a small but potent piece of evidence that the experts might not have all the answers. The media, always hungry for stories that challenged expectations and sparked debate, took notice. Articles appeared in newspapers and magazines, some treating the hammer as a genuine mystery, and others approaching it with skepticism. Television programs featured the artifact, inviting viewers to consider the possibility that human history might be far longer and stranger than previously believed. The London hammer entered the popular imagination, becoming one of the most famous examples of a category of objects known as out-of-place artifacts. Out-of-place artifacts, sometimes abbreviated as OBAs, are objects that appear to be anachronistic, items found in contexts that suggest they should not exist. A hammer in ancient rock, a spark plug encased in stone, a metal vase supposedly extracted from solid bedrock. These are the kinds of finds that capture the imagination and fuel speculation about lost civilizations, ancient astronauts, or fundamental errors in our understanding of the past. The London hammer fit perfectly into this tradition, joining a gallery of enigmatic objects that seem to defy conventional explanation. The appeal of out-of-place artifacts is not difficult to understand. They offer a sense of wonder and mystery, a feeling that the world is more strange and surprising than our ordinary experience suggests. They invite us to question what we think we know, to consider possibilities that lie beyond the boundaries of accepted knowledge. And for those who are predisposed to distrust mainstream science or to believe in alternative histories, they provide tangible evidence that seems to support their views. But the category of out-of-place artifacts is also deeply problematic from a scientific perspective. In many cases, the objects turn out to have mundane explanations that were overlooked or ignored in the rush to proclaim a mystery. A supposedly ancient artifact may simply have been misidentified, its context misunderstood, its origins more recent than initially claimed. The excitement of the anomaly can blind us to the patient work of investigation that might reveal a perfectly ordinary explanation hiding beneath the extraordinary appearance. The London hammer is a case in point. While Carl Ball and others presented it as evidence of impossible antiquity, mainstream scientists who examined the claims reached very different conclusions. They pointed out that the rock surrounding the hammer was not necessarily part of the ancient Cretaceous formations of the region, but might instead be a much more recent concretion formed around a tool that had been lost or discarded in relatively modern times. The appearance of age, they argued, was deceiving. Product of natural processes that could create ancient-looking rock in a surprisingly short period. These scientific critiques did little to dampen the enthusiasm of those who believed in the hammer's antiquity. For many, the very fact that mainstream scientists rejected the claims was evidence that the establishment was unwilling to consider evidence that contradicted their theories. The debate took on the character of a culture war, with the hammer serving as a proxy for larger disagreements about the nature of knowledge, the authority of science, and the relationship between faith and reason. The Creation Evidence Museum continued to display the hammer prominently, presenting it as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence against the conventional scientific worldview. Visitors came from around the world to see it, to photograph it, to marvel at the apparent impossibility of a human tool trapped in ancient stone. For these visitors, the hammer was not just an object, but a statement, a declaration that the world was more mysterious than the scientists would have us believe. The story of the London hammer illustrates the complex relationship between scientific investigation and popular belief. On one hand, the hammer is a genuine artifact that raises legitimate questions about how it came to be encased in rock. These questions deserve careful investigation, using the best tools and methods available to modern science. On the other hand, the hammer has been enlisted in ideological battles that have little to do with the object itself, becoming a symbol in debates about creation and evolution, faith and reason, expertise and skepticism. Navigating this terrain requires a certain kind of intellectual humility. We must be willing to take anomalies seriously, to investigate them thoroughly, and to follow the evidence wherever it leads. But we must also be cautious about leaping to extraordinary conclusions on the basis of limited evidence. And we must be aware of the ways in which our pre-existing beliefs can shape our interpretation of what we see. The London hammer is an invitation to practice this kind of careful, open-minded inquiry, neither dismissing the mystery out of hand nor accepting extraordinary claims without sufficient support. As you rest with these thoughts, consider the journey that the hammer has taken since it was first discovered along the banks of Red Creek, from a quiet creek bed in rural Texas to a museum display case, from a private curiosity to a public symbol. The hammer has traveled through the world of ideas as well as through physical space. It has been photographed and analyzed, debated and defended, embraced and rejected. And through it all, it has remained what it always was, a small tool made of iron and wood, wrapped in a shell of stone, waiting patiently for someone to unravel its secrets. The night wraps around you like a blanket, soft and warm, as the story continues to unfold. The claims and counterclaims, the believers and skeptics, all fade into the background as you focus on the object at the center of it all. The hammer does not care about the debates that swirl around it, simply as a relic of some past moment, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Let your mind rest with this image, the hammer in its case, the questions hanging in the air, the mystery as alive as ever. There is comfort in the not knowing, in the space between question and answer, where wonder can flourish. The London hammer has lived in that space for nearly a century, and it shows no signs of leaving. Whatever the truth of its origins, whatever explanation ultimately proves correct. Okay? The hammer will always carry with it the memory of the questions it raised, the debates it inspired, the imaginations it fired. That is its legacy, as much as any physical properties it might possess. The transformation of the London hammer from obscure find to famous anomaly tells us something important about how ideas spread and take root in the human mind. An object alone, sitting in a drawer or on a shelf, has limited power to influence thought. But an object presented with a compelling narrative, placed in a context that gives it meaning, displayed for an audience eager to believe, such an object can take on a life of its own. The London hammer became more than just a hammer. It became a story, a symbol, a touchstone for those who saw in it confirmation of their deepest convictions about the nature of reality. This is neither good nor bad in itself. Stories are how human beings make sense of the world, how we transmit knowledge and share experience across generations. But stories can also mislead, can simplify, can obscure as much as they reveal. The story of the London hammer, as told by its advocates, is a story of scientific overreach and hidden truth, of artifacts that challenge the establishment and point toward deeper mysteries. The story, as told by its critics, is one of misunderstanding and wishful thinking of natural processes mistaken for supernatural origins. Both stories contain elements of truth, and neither captures the full complexity of the situation. Perhaps the most honest response to the London hammer is to hold both stories lightly, to recognize that the object itself is more interesting than any single narrative we might construct around it. The hammer exists. It was found in rock. These are facts that no interpretation can change. What we make of those facts, what conclusions we draw, and what questions we ask, okay? These are choices that reflect our values and assumptions as much as they reflect the evidence before us, carrying us deeper into the heart of the mystery. The claims of extraordinary antiquity have been made, and they have been challenged. Its place in the public eye, a symbol of contested knowledge and unresolved questions. But there is more to discover, more to understand, and the journey is far from over. Let the gentle rhythm of the words carry you onward into the next chapter of this strange and fascinating tale. To understand how a hammer might come to rest inside a shell of stone, we must enter the quiet world of geological processes, where time moves differently and transformations that seem impossible unfold with patient inevitability. The science of concretions offers a window into this world, revealing how ordinary objects can become wrapped in mineral coatings that give them the appearance of impossible antiquity. It is a story of water and dissolved minerals, of chemistry and circumstance, and it holds the key to understanding artifacts like the London hammer. A concretion is a mass of mineral matter that forms when dissolved substances in groundwater precipitate out and accumulate around some central nucleus. The nucleus can be almost anything: a pebble, a fossil, a piece of shell, or in some cases an object of human manufacture. As water flows through sediment, carrying its invisible cargo of dissolved minerals, it encounters conditions that cause those minerals to solidify and deposit around whatever happens to be in its path. Layer by layer, the mineral coating grows, eventually encasing the central object in a shell of rock. The most common mineral involved in this process is calcium carbonate, the same substance that forms limestone, marble, and the shells of countless marine creatures. Calcium carbonate dissolves readily in water that is slightly acidic, such as rainwater that has absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. As this water percolates through soil and rock, it picks up calcium and carbonate ions, carrying them along in solution. When conditions change, when the water warms or loses some of its acidity, or simply evaporates, the dissolved minerals come out of solution and solidify, forming new deposits of calcium carbonate. This process is happening all around us, all the time, in countless locations across the globe. It is responsible for the formation of stalactites and stalagmites in caves, those spectacular columns of stone that grow drop by drop over thousands of years. It creates the hard water deposits that accumulate in pipes and kettles, the white crusts that form on faucets and shower heads, and it produces concretions, those rounded masses of rock that can be found in sediments of all ages, from the most ancient formations to deposits laid down in historical times. The rate at which concretions form depends on many factors, including the concentration of dissolved minerals in the water, the temperature, the acidity, and the nature of the sediment in which the process is occurring. Under some conditions, concretions can grow very slowly, adding only a fraction of an inch over thousands of years, but under other conditions, the process can be surprisingly rapid, producing substantial accumulations of mineral material in just a few decades or even less. There are numerous documented examples of concretions forming around objects of known recent origin. In coastal areas where seawater is rich in dissolved calcium carbonate, objects left on the seafloor can become encrusted with mineral deposits in a matter of years. Anchors, chains, bottles, and other artifacts from shipwrecks have been found coated in thick layers of calcium carbonate, looking far older than their actual age. In some cases, entire shipwrecks have been transformed into artificial reefs, their metal and wooden structures serving as scaffolds for the accumulation of mineral deposits and marine organisms. One particularly striking example comes from the waters off the coast of Australia, where researchers have documented the rapid formation of concretions around objects placed on the seafloor. Within just a few years, metal objects became heavily encrusted with calcium carbonate, taking on an appearance that could easily be mistaken for great antiquity. The process was accelerated by the activity of marine organisms, which contributed their own shells and sky to the growing mass, but the fundamental mechanism was the same precipitation of dissolved minerals that occurs in terrestrial environments. Similar processes have been observed in freshwater settings as well. Springs that emerge from limestone bedrock are often supersaturated with dissolved calcium carbonate, and objects placed in their flow can become coated with mineral deposits in remarkably short periods. There are tourist attractions around the world where visitors can leave objects in mineral-rich waters and return months or years later to find them transformed into stone-like curiosities, souvenirs of a geological process that normally operates on timescales far beyond human experience. The implications of this rapid mineralization for understanding the London hammer are significant. If concretions can form around modern objects in just a few years or decades under the right conditions, then the presence of rock around the hammer does not necessarily indicate great age. The stone could have formed relatively recently, wrapping itself around a tool that was lost or discarded in the 19th or early 20th century. The appearance of antiquity would be an illusion, a product of natural processes that can mimic the effects of deep time in a surprisingly short period. This is not mere speculation, but a conclusion supported by the evidence. Geologists who have examined the London hammer and its encasing rock have noted that the concretion does not appear to be part of the solid bedrock of the region. Instead, it seems to be a secondary formation, a mass of mineral material that accumulated around the hammer after it came to rest in the sediment. The rock is real, and the process that created it is genuine, but the timeline is likely measured in decades or centuries rather than millions of years. The presence of shell fragments within the concretion, which some have cited as evidence of Cretaceous age, is also explicable within this framework. The sediments along Red Creek and other waterways in the region are full of material eroded from the ancient limestone formations that make up the bedrock. Fragments of fossil shells, broken loose from their original context, are mixed in with the sand and gravel of the creek beds. When a concretion forms in such an environment, it naturally incorporates whatever material happens to be present, including these ancient shell fragments. The shells may be millions of years old, but the rock that contains them could be quite recent. This mixing of old and new is a common feature of geological environments and can easily lead to confusion about the age of particular formations. A rock might contain fossils that are genuinely ancient, while itself being relatively young, having formed from sediments that included material eroded from older deposits. Careful analysis can usually distinguish between these possibilities, but casual observation can be misleading, giving an impression of antiquity that does not reflect the true history of the formation. The science of concretions also helps explain the tight fit between the hammer and its encasing rock. It's that intimate contact that has puzzled so many observers. As the mineral deposits accumulated around the hammer, they conformed precisely to its shape, filling every gap and crevice, creating a perfect mold of the tool within. This is exactly what we would expect from a concretion forming around an existing object. The rock did not crack open to admit the hammer and then somehow heal itself. Instead, it grew around the hammer from the beginning, layer by layer, until the tool was completely enclosed. Understanding these processes does not diminish the wonder of the London hammer, but rather redirects it. The mystery is not how a hammer came to be inside ancient rock, but how the patient work of water and minerals can transform an ordinary object into something that appears extraordinary. It is a reminder that the natural world is full of processes that can deceive our senses, creating illusions that challenge our understanding and invite us to look more closely at the world around us. The formation of concretions is just one example of the many ways in which geological processes can surprise us. Rocks that appear solid and permanent are actually in constant flux, dissolving and reforming, eroding and accumulating. It's changing in ways that are too slow for human eyes to perceive, but that transform the landscape utterly over geological time. The earth beneath our feet is not static, but dynamic, a living system of interacting processes that have been operating since the planet first formed billions of years ago. As you rest with these thoughts, let your mind dwell on the quiet work of water and stone. Imagine the slow drip of mineral-laden water through sediment, each drop depositing its tiny cargo of dissolved material, building up layer by layer into something that will endure for centuries or millennia. Imagine the hammer lying in its bed of sand and gravel, gradually disappearing beneath a growing shell of rock, becoming something other than what it was, a relic wrapped in the patient embrace of geological time. There is a kind of magic in these processes, a transformation that happens without intention or design, guided only by the laws of chemistry and physics, operating over spans of time that dwarf human experience. The London hammer is a product of this magic, an ordinary tool made extraordinary by the circumstances of its burial and the processes that followed. It did not need to be millions of years old to become encased in rock. It only needed to be in the right place at the right time, exposed to the right conditions for the right duration. The night continues its slow passage, and the mysteries of the earth unfold in the darkness like flowers opening to the moon. The science of concretions is just one thread in the vast tapestry of geological knowledge, but it is a thread that helps us understand how the London hammer came to be what it is. The rock is real, the hammer is real. The process that brought them together is real, and understanding that process does not diminish the wonder, but deepens it, revealing the extraordinary within the ordinary, the remarkable within the routine. Let your breathing slow as you contemplate these patient transformations. The water flows, the minerals precipitate, the rock grows. Somewhere in the hills of Texas, these processes continue even now, wrapping new objects in new shells of stone, creating future mysteries for future generations to puzzle over. The earth is always at work, always changing, always surprising those who take the time to look closely and ask questions. And so, we leave the science of concretions for now, carrying with us a deeper understanding of how the natural world can create apparent anomalies that are not anomalies at all, but simply the results of processes we do not always recognize. The London hammer fits within this framework, an object that looks impossible, but is in fact entirely consistent with what we know about geology and mineralogy. The mystery remains, but it is a different kind of mystery now. A puzzle whose solution lies not in overturning our understanding of history, but in appreciating the subtle and often surprising ways that nature operates. Rest now with this knowledge, and let it settle into your mind like sediment settling to the bottom of a quiet pool. The water that carved Red Creek still flows through those Texas hills, still carries its cargo of dissolved minerals, still deposits its patient layers of calcium carbonate on whatever objects lie in its path. The processes that created the London hammer's stony shell have not stopped. They continue in their quiet way, indifferent to human curiosity, indifferent to the debates and controversies that swirl around a single artifact found so many decades ago. There is peace in this understanding, a sense of connection to processes far larger and older than ourselves. We are brief visitors on this planet, our lives measured in decades, while the Earth measures time in millions and billions of years. And yet, we can understand something of how these vast processes work, can trace the chemistry of mineral precipitation, can recognize the signs of concretion formation when we encounter them in the field. This understanding is one of the great gifts of science, a window into the workings of a world that existed long before us and will continue long after we are gone. The story continues, the mystery deepens, and there is still much more to explore. Let the gentle rhythm of these words carry you forward into the night. Beyond the question of how the hammer came to be encased in rock lies another set of questions, equally important and equally fascinating. What can the hammer itself tell us about its origins? What secrets are locked within the iron of its head and the wood of its handle? To answer these questions, we must turn to the tools of scientific analysis, the techniques that allow us to peer into the very structure of materials and read the stories written in their composition. The hammerhead has been the subject of various analyses over the years, the proponents of its extraordinary age pointing to certain features as evidence that the tool could not have been made in recent times. Chief among these claims is the assertion that the iron of the hammerhead is unusually pure, containing a higher percentage of iron and fewer impurities than would be expected in metal, produced through conventional smelting methods. If true, this would be a remarkable finding, suggesting either an advanced technology or an unusual source of raw material. Iron, in its natural state, is almost never found in pure form on the surface of the earth. The metal is highly reactive, combining readily with oxygen to form iron oxides, the rusty, red, and brown minerals that color so much of the world's soil and rock. To extract pure iron from these ores requires a process of smelting, heating the ore in the presence of carbon to draw off the oxygen and leave behind the metallic iron. This process inevitably introduces impurities into the metal. Traces of carbon, silicon, manganese, and other elements that become incorporated into the iron during smelting. The composition of iron produced through smelting varies depending on the ore used, the fuel burned, the temperature achieved, and the skill of the smith. Traditional bloomery furnaces, used for thousands of years before the development of modern blast furnaces, produced iron with a characteristic set of impurities that can often be traced to specific regions or time periods. By analyzing the composition of an iron artifact, metallurgists can sometimes determine where and when it was made. Reading the chemical signature left behind by the smelting process, the claims about the London hammer's iron purity have been difficult to verify independently. Different analyses have produced different results, and the methodology used in some of the tests has been questioned by mainstream scientists. Some reports have suggested that the iron contains an unusually high percentage of the pure metal, with very low levels of carbon and other impurities. Others have found a more typical composition, consistent with iron produced through 19th-century smelting techniques. One element that has attracted particular attention is chlorine, which some analyzers have reportedly detected in the hammer's iron. Chlorine is not typically associated with iron smelting and would be an unusual find in a metal artifact. Its presence if confirmed, might suggest exposure to seawater or other chlorine-rich environments, or it might indicate contamination introduced after the hammer was manufactured. Without more rigorous and reproducible testing, it is difficult to know what to make of this finding. The uncertainty surrounding the metallurgical analysis highlights a broader challenge in evaluating claims about anomalous artifacts. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence presented for the London hammer's unusual composition has not met the standards that would be required for acceptance by the mainstream scientific community. This does not mean that the claims are necessarily wrong, but it does mean that they must be treated with appropriate caution until more rigorous studies can be conducted. What we can say with more confidence is that the hammerhead shows the marks of skilled craftsmanship. The iron was shaped with care, formed into a functional tool that would have served its purpose well. The eye through which the handle passes was carefully formed. K and the striking surfaces show the wear patterns consistent with the actual use. Whoever made this hammer knew what they were doing, understood the properties of iron, and possessed the skills to work the metal effectively. The design of the hammerhead is consistent with tools used in the 19th century, particularly those employed in mining and quarrying operations. The size and shape suggest a tool intended for light to medium work, suitable for driving wedges or breaking small rocks, rather than for heavy forging or construction. Similar hammers can be found in collections of historical mining equipment, their forms standardized through generations of practical use. Turning from the iron to the wood, we encounter another set of intriguing observations. The handle of the London hammer is made of wood that has undergone partial transformation, its structure altered by processes that have darkened and hardened the material. The portion of the handle that was most deeply embedded within the encasing rock shows the most pronounced changes. It's taking on a texture and density that has led some observers to describe it as partially coalified. Coalification is the process by which organic material, typically plant matter, is transformed into coal through the application of heat and pressure over extended periods. In its full expression, coalification proceeds through stages, from peat to lignite to bituminous coal to anthracite, each stage representing a further concentration of carbon and a further loss of volatile compounds. The process normally requires millions of years, but the rate can be accelerated under conditions of elevated temperature and pressure. The partial coalification of the hammer handle has been cited as evidence of great age, suggesting that the tool has been buried long enough for this transformation to begin. But as with the claims about the iron, the interpretation is not straightforward. The degree of qualification observed in the handle is relatively minor, more a darkening and hardening of the wood than a true transformation into cold. And research has shown that similar changes can occur in wood that is buried in certain chemical environments. Even over relatively short periods, waterlogged wood, in particular, can undergo significant changes in its structure and appearance. The action of bacteria and fungi, combined with the infiltration of minerals from the surrounding water, can alter the wood's color, density, and texture. In some cases, the wood becomes impregnated with mineral deposits, taking on a stone-like quality that can be mistaken for petrification or coalification. These processes can occur over centuries or even decades under the right conditions. The handle of the London hammer appears to be made from a species of wood that was common in 19th century America, consistent with the hypothesis that the tool is a relatively recent artifact rather than a relic of the distant past. The partial transformation of the wood, while visually striking, does not require millions of years to explain. It is consistent with burial in a mineral-rich environment for a period of decades to centuries, exactly what we would expect if the hammer were lost in the 1800s and subsequently encased in a concretion. Scientists who have examined the London hammer from a mainstream perspective have generally concluded that the artifact is most likely a 19th century tool that became encased in a naturally forming concretion. The rock surrounding the hammer is not part of the ancient bedrock of the region, but a secondary formation that developed around the tool after it was buried. The iron and wood show no features that cannot be explained by known processes operating over historical timescales. This conclusion does not satisfy everyone. Those who believe in the hammer's extraordinary age argue that mainstream science is too quick to dismiss evidence that challenges its assumptions, that the analyses conducted have been superficial or biased, that the true significance of the artifact has been overlooked. The debate continues, with neither side fully convincing the other, and the hammer itself remains at the center of the controversy, silent and enigmatic. What the scientific analysis does reveal, regardless of how one interprets it, is the remarkable complexity of even simple objects. A hammer that might seem straightforward and unremarkable becomes, upon close examination, a repository of information about the materials from which it was made, the processes that shaped those materials, and the conditions to which it was exposed over the years. Every artifact is a time capsule, carrying within it traces of its history that can be read by those with the knowledge and tools to decipher them. The iron of the hammerhead holds the memory of the ore from which it was smelted, the furnace in which it was heated, the hammer and anvil that shaped it into its final form. The wood of the handle records the growth of the tree from which it was cut, the climate and conditions under which that tree lived, the tools that shaped the wood into a functional handle, and the rock that surrounded them. Both tells the story of water and minerals, of slow accumulation and patient transformation, of an ordinary object made extraordinary by the circumstances of its burial. As you rest with these thoughts, let your mind wander through the layers of history embedded in this small artifact. The hammer is a meeting point of many stories, many processes, many timescales. It connects us to the miners and craftsmen of the 19th century, to the geological processes that shaped the Texas landscape, to the scientific methods that allow us to investigate the past. It is a reminder that every object, no matter how humble, has a story to tell if we are willing to listen. The night deepens around you, and the questions continue to multiply. What more might the hammer reveal if subjected to more rigorous analysis? What secrets might still be hidden in the structure of its iron and wood? These questions hang in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable, invitations to continued inquiry and reflection. Let your breathing slow as you contemplate the patient work of scientific investigation. The hammer has been examined and debated, analyzed and interpreted, and still it keeps some of its mysteries close. This is the nature of inquiry, an endless process of questioning and discovery that never quite reaches a final answer. The hammer will continue to fascinate and perplex, to inspire wonder and provoke debate, for as long as there are curious minds willing to engage with its enigma. The story moves forward, carrying us toward new perspectives and new questions. The scientific analysis has illuminated some aspects of the mystery while leaving others in shadow. The hammer remains what it has always been, a small tool of iron and wood wrapped in stone, waiting for the next generation of investigators to take up the challenge of understanding its origins and its meaning. There is something humbling about this uncertainty, something that reminds us of the limits of our knowledge, even as we celebrate how much we have learned. The hammer has been poked and prodded, measured and analyzed, photographed and debated. Still, it refuses to yield all of its secrets. Perhaps this is as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to endure, to keep us questioning, to remind us that the world is larger and stranger than our theories can fully capture. The metallurgists and geologists have had their say, offering their interpretations and their conclusions, but the hammer does not belong to science alone. It belongs also to the realm of wonder, to that space in the human mind where curiosity is born and mysteries take root. The scientific analysis is valuable, essential even, but it is not the whole story. The whole story includes the sense of awe that the hammer inspires, the questions it raises about the nature of time and history, the way it challenges us to look more closely at the world around us. As the night wraps around you like a soft blanket, let these thoughts settle into stillness. The iron and the wood, the questions and the analyses, all fade into the quiet rhythm of your breathing. The hammer rests in its display case, far from the creek where it was found, and the mystery rests with you, a companion for the journey into sleep. There will be more to explore when morning comes, more threads to follow in this strange and fascinating tale. But for now, let the quiet darkness hold you, and let the mystery be enough. To understand where the London hammer might have come from, we must journey back through time once more. Not to the age of dinosaurs, but to a much more recent era, the 19th century, when the hills of central Texas were being settled and transformed by waves of newcomers seeking land, opportunity, and the wealth that might be extracted from the earth. This was a time of rapid change, when the quiet landscape that had endured for millennia was suddenly filled with the sounds of axes and hammers, plows and pickaxes, the clamor of a civilization on the move. The region around what would become London, Texas, was part of the vast frontier that drew settlers westward throughout the 1800s. These were hardy people, farmers and ranchers, merchants and craftsmen, who carved homesteads out of the wilderness and built communities where none had existed before. They brought with them the tools of their trades, the implements necessary for clearing land, building structures, and working the soil. Among these tools were hammers of every size and description, from heavy sledges for driving posts to delicate instruments for fine woodwork. The Texas Hill Country presented both opportunities and challenges to these early settlers. The land was beautiful but rugged, the soil thin and rocky, the water sources unpredictable. Farming was difficult in many areas, and those who succeeded often did so by combining agriculture with other pursuits. Ranching became a major industry, with cattle and later sheep and goats grazing on the cedar-covered hills. But there were other resources to be exploited as well. Minerals hidden beneath the surface that drew prospectors and miners into the region. Mining activity in 19th century Texas was never as extensive or as famous as the gold rushes of California or the silver strikes of Nevada. But it was, nonetheless, a significant part of the state's economic development. Iron ore was found in various locations, along with deposits of coal, copper, lead, and other valuable minerals. Small-scale mining operations sprang up across the hill country as entrepreneurs sought to extract wealth from the rocky landscape. These operations required tools, and among the most essential was the humble hammer. The hammers used by 19th century miners were functional implements, designed for durability and effectiveness rather than elegance. They came in various sizes and configurations, each suited to particular tasks. Some were heavy and blunt, meant for breaking rock and driving wedges. Others were lighter and more refined, used for more delicate work, such as shaping or adjusting equipment. The hammer that would eventually be found along Red Creek fits comfortably within this range, size and design, consistent with the tools that were commonly used in mining and quarrying operations of the era. Acquiring such a hammer in 19th century Texas would not have been difficult. General stores in the small towns that dotted the frontier stocked a variety of tools for sale, imported from manufacturers in the eastern states or even from Europe. Blacksmiths could forge custom implements to meet specific needs, shaping iron over their anvils into the forms required by their customers. A miner or settler who needed a hammer could obtain one with relative ease, and the tool would become part of the essential kit that accompanied them in their daily work. The question of how such a hammer might have ended up in a creek bed, where it would eventually become encased in stone, is not difficult to answer. Tools were lost all the time in the rough conditions of frontier life. A hammer might slip from a hand or belt while crossing a stream, tumbling into the water and settling among the rocks and sand. It might be set down and forgotten during a moment of distraction, left behind when its owner moved on to other tasks. It might be discarded when it became worn or damaged, tossed aside in favor of a newer implement. The banks of Red Creek would have been a natural corridor for travel and work in the 19th century. The creek provided water for humans and animals, a precious resource in the often dry Texas landscape. Settlers and miners would have followed its course, stopping to rest and water their livestock, perhaps pausing to prospect for minerals in the exposed rock along its banks. Any of these activities could have resulted in a hammer being lost, accidentally or intentionally, in the sediments of the creek bed. Once in the creek bed, the hammer would have begun its slow transformation. Buried in sand and gravel, exposed to the mineral-rich waters that flowed through the sediment, the tool became a nucleus around which dissolved calcium carbonate could precipitate. Year by year, decade by decade, the concretion grew, wrapping the hammer in an ever-thickening shell of stone. The wood of the handle began to change as well, darkening and hardening as minerals infiltrated its structure. The iron head, protected from the air by its coating of rock, avoided the worst of the rusting that would have destroyed an exposed tool. This scenario requires no extraordinary explanations, no appeal to lost civilizations or impossible antiquity. It asks only that we accept what we know to be true about 19th century Texas, about the tools that were used there, about the geological processes that operate in the region. A hammer was lost. A concretion formed. Decades, or perhaps a century later, the resulting object was found by Max Hahn, who recognized it as something unusual, but could not have known the debates it would eventually inspire. The simplicity of this explanation is, in some ways, its greatest strength. It accounts for all the observed features of the London hammer without requiring us to overturn our understanding of history or geology. The hammer is old, but not impossibly old. The rock is real, but recently formed. The apparent anomaly dissolves when we understand the processes involved, leaving behind an interesting artifact with a perfectly mundane origin. But simplicity can also be unsatisfying, particularly for those who are drawn to mystery and wonder. The explanation that the hammer is a 19th century tool encased in a recent concretion lacks the drama of a relic. From a lost civilization, the excitement of evidence that human history is far longer and stranger than we have been told. For those who want the world to be more mysterious than it appears, the mundane explanation feels like a disappointment, a closing of doors rather than an opening. This tension between the desire for mystery and the demands of evidence is at the heart of many debates about anomalous artifacts. We want the world to surprise us, to offer glimpses of hidden truths and forgotten histories, and sometimes it does. The history of science is full of discoveries that overturned established assumptions and revealed aspects of reality that no one had imagined. But for every genuine discovery, there are many more apparent anomalies that turn out to have ordinary explanations. Objects and phenomena that seemed mysterious only because we did not yet understand the processes that created them. The London hammer invites us to hold these two impulses in balance, to remain open to genuine mystery while also demanding rigorous evidence before accepting extraordinary claims. The tool is genuinely interesting, a window into the geological processes that shape our world and the historical circumstances of 19th century Texas. It does not need to be millions of years old to be worthy of our attention. It's a real story, the story of miners and settlers, of lost tools and forming concretions, is fascinating in its own right. The people who lived and worked in the Texas Hill Country in the 1800s left behind many traces of their presence. Old homesteads crumble slowly back into the earth, or stone foundations outlasting the wooden structures they once supported. Abandoned mines dot the landscape, their shafts and tunnels collapsing over the decades, tailings piles slowly being reclaimed by vegetation. And scattered throughout the region are the small artifacts of daily life. The tools and utensils and personal items that were lost or discarded, and that occasionally surface to remind us of those who came before. The London hammer is one such artifact, a tool that was once held in a human hand, used for human purposes, and then lost to the processes of time and nature. The person who dropped it or left it behind could never have imagined that their hammer would one day become famous, the subject of books and articles and television programs, displayed in a museum and debated by people around the world. They were simply going about their daily work, using the tools of their trade, living their lives in a landscape that demanded constant effort and adaptation. There is something poignant in this thought, a reminder of the countless anonymous lives that have come before us, each one full of hopes and struggles, joys and sorrows that are now lost to memory. The hammer connects us to one of those lives, a single individual whose identity we will never know, but whose presence we can feel through the tool they left behind. It is a thread stretching back through time, linking us to the human community that extends across generations and centuries. As you rest with these thoughts, let your imagination wander through the Texas hill country of the 1800s. Picture the small settlements scattered across the landscape, the ranches and farms and mining camps where people made their lives. Picture the dusty roads and clear running creeks, the cedar-covered hills and limestone bluffs. Picture a miner or a settler, hammer in hand, going about the work of building a life in a new land. And picture the moment when that hammer slipped away, falling into the creek, beginning its long journey toward becoming the mystery we know today. The night embraces you with its gentle darkness, and the figures of the past fade back into shadow. The hammer rests in its case, far from the hills where it was made and lost and found, but the connection to those who came before remains. We are all part of the same story, the long human story of work and wonder, of tools and transformations, of mysteries found and sometimes solved. The London Hammer is a small chapter in that story, but it is a chapter worth reading, worth pondering, worth carrying with us into sleep. Let your breathing slow as the 19th century recedes into the distance. The miners and settlers have long since passed from the scene, but their traces remain, scattered across the landscape like seeds waiting to be discovered. The hammer was one such seed, planted unknowingly in the bed of a quiet creek, growing slowly into the enigma that would captivate future generations. Its story is part of the larger story of human presence on this land, a story that continues to unfold with each passing year. The night is deep now, and the mysteries of the past blend with the quiet of the present. The hammer has traveled far, from a working tool to a famous artifact, from obscurity to the center of a controversy that spans decades. But at its heart, it remains what it always was, a simple implement made by human hands for human purposes. That is its true identity, beneath all the speculation and debate. And that is the identity we carry with us as the story continues to unfold. Rest now with the miners and settlers of old Texas, companions across time, whose lives and labors have left their marks upon the land. The hammer they used and lost speaks to us still, a voice from the past that reminds us of our connection to all who have come before. The mystery endures, but so does the human story at its center. The story of work and loss and the strange paths that objects travel through time. The London Hammer does not stand alone in the gallery of mysterious objects that have captured human imagination over the years. It belongs to a larger family of artifacts that seem to defy explanation, items found in contexts that appear impossible, objects that challenge our understanding of history and invite us to wonder whether the past might be stranger than we have been taught. These anomalous artifacts, as they are often called, have fascinated seekers and skeptics alike, sparking debates that illuminate not only the objects themselves, but also the nature of human curiosity and belief. Consider, for example, the story of the Coso artifact discovered in California in 1961. 3 rock hunters were searching for geodes in the mountains near Alancha when they found what appeared to be an unusual stone. When they cut it open, expecting to find the hollow crystal-lined interior typical of geodes, they instead discovered what looked like a mechanical device, a cylinder of metal and ceramic surrounded by a shell of hardite. The object bore a striking resemblance to a modern spark plug, yet it was allegedly encased in rock that was estimated to be hundreds of thousands of years old. The Koso artifact generated considerable excitement among those who believed it might be evidence of an ancient advanced civilization, or even extraterrestrial visitors. How could a spark plug, or something very like one, have ended up inside rock of such antiquity? The implications seemed staggering, a complete overturning of everything we thought we knew about human history and technological development. The artifact was photographed, analyzed, and debated, becoming a staple of books and articles about unexplained mysteries. Yet closer examination revealed a more prosaic explanation. The object was indeed a spark plug, specifically a 1920 champion spark plug of a type commonly used in Model T Fords and other vehicles of that period. The casing material was not ancient rock, but accumulation that had formed around the spark plug over just a few decades, the result of mineral-rich water percolating through the soil. The apparently impossible artifact turned out to be a discarded automotive part that had undergone the same kind of rapid mineralization we have discussed, relation to the London hammer. Another famous example is the antiquity mechanism discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece in 1900. This device, corroded and encrusted after 2,000 years on the seafloor, turned out to be an extraordinarily sophisticated mechanical computer, capable of calculating astronomical positions and predicting eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Its complexity stunned researchers who had not believed that ancient Greek technology could have achieved such precision. Here was a genuine anomaly, an object that really did challenge assumptions about the past. The antiquity mechanism differs from artifacts like the London hammer in an important way. Rigorous scientific analysis confirmed its authenticity and its antiquity, establishing beyond reasonable doubt that it was indeed a product of ancient Greek craftsmanship. The mechanism was not found in an impossible context, but rather in exactly the kind of context where one might expect to find Greek artifacts, a shipwreck dating to the 1st century before the Common Era. The surprise lay not in its location, but in its sophistication, evidence that ancient peoples were capable of achievements we had not fully appreciated. This distinction matters because it helps us understand what makes a genuine anomaly different from an apparent one. A genuine anomaly expands our understanding, revealing aspects of the past that we had overlooked or underestimated. An apparent anomaly, by contrast, seems mysterious only because we have not yet understood the processes that created it. The London hammer and the Koso artifact fall into the second category. Objects that appear impossible until we recognize the natural processes that can explain their seemingly anomalous features. The human mind is powerfully drawn to anomalies, two things that do not fit the expected pattern, that stand out from the ordinary background of experience. This attraction has deep evolutionary roots. Our ancestors, who noticed the unusual rustle in the grass, the unexpected movement in the shadows, were more likely to survive and pass on their genes than those who failed to attend to anomalies. We are the descendants of the alert and the curious, and that inheritance shapes our response to objects like the London hammer. But this same attraction to anomalies can lead us astray if we are not careful. The mind that sees a mysterious shape in the shadows may be noticing a real threat, or it may be constructing a phantom out of random stimuli. The same cognitive processes that helped our ancestors survive can generate false positives, perceiving patterns and meanings when none exist. When we encounter an object that seems anomalous, we must be willing to investigate carefully, to consider multiple explanations, and to accept mundane answers when the evidence supports them. The psychology of anomalous artifacts is complex and fascinating. For some people, these objects represent hope, evidence that the world is more mysterious and wonderful than the dry pronouncements of mainstream science would suggest. They offer the possibility that there are still secrets to be discovered, hidden truths waiting to be revealed. alternative histories that challenge the dominant narrative. This hope can be deeply meaningful, providing a sense of wonder and possibility that enriches life. For others, anomalous artifacts represent a challenge to authority, a way of pushing back against experts and institutions that seem to claim a monopoly on truth. The scientist who dismisses the London hammer as a 19th-century tool encased in a recent concretion may be right. But the dismissal can feel arrogant, a refusal to take seriously evidence that does not fit the established framework. Belief in anomalous artifacts can be a form of intellectual rebellion, a declaration that the official story is not the only story. There is also a social dimension to the fascination with anomalous artifacts. Communities form around these objects, groups of people who share an interest in mysteries and alternative explanations. These communities provide belonging and identity, a sense of participating in something larger than oneself. The London hammer is not just an object, but a symbol of membership in a community of seekers and questioners. People who are not satisfied with easy answers and who continue to probe the boundaries of the known. The tension between wonder and skepticism, between openness to mystery and demand for evidence, is one of the defining features of human inquiry. We want the world to surprise us, but we also want to understand it accurately. These two desires can pull in different directions, leading to conflicts between those who prioritize wonder and those who prioritize evidence. The debate over the London hammer is, in part, a debate about how to balance these competing values. Skepticism, properly understood, is not the enemy of wonder, but its ally. A skeptic is not someone who refuses to believe anything, but someone who insists on good evidence before accepting extraordinary claims. Skepticism protects us from being fooled by apparent anomalies that have mundane explanations, freeing us to appreciate the genuine mysteries that the world has to offer. Okay? The antiquity mechanism is more wonderful, not less. Okay? Because it has survived rigorous scrutiny and emerged as a genuine window into the sophistication of ancient technology. At the same time, skepticism can become rigid and dismissive if it closes itself off to the possibility of genuine anomalies. The history of science includes many examples of claims that were initially rejected by the establishment, but later proved to be correct. Continental drift, the bacterial cause of ulcers, the existence of giant squids. All of these were once dismissed by mainstream science before being accepted as true. A healthy skepticism remains open to revision, willing to update its conclusions in light of new evidence. The London hammer invites us to practice this balanced approach, combining wonder with critical thinking, openness with rigor. We can appreciate the strangeness of the object, the questions it raises, the debates it has inspired, without committing ourselves to extraordinary conclusions that the evidence does not support. We can hold the mystery lightly, enjoying it for what it is, while also recognizing the natural processes that most likely explain it. There is a meditative quality to this balanced stance, a willingness to rest in uncertainty without grasping for premature closure. The hammer may be a 19th-century tool in a recent concretion, or it may be something stranger. We do not need to decide definitively tonight. We can let the question remain open, a companion for our thoughts, a reminder that the world is full of things we do not fully understand. As you settle deeper into the quiet of the night, consider the many anomalous artifacts that have captured human imagination over the years. Some have turned out to have mundane explanations, their apparent mystery dissolving in the light of careful investigation. Others remain genuinely puzzling, inviting continued inquiry and debate. And some have revealed unexpected truths about the past, expanding our understanding of what human beings have achieved and experienced over the long course of history. The London hammer is one small piece in this larger mosaic, a single object among many that have prompted wonder and controversy. Its fame is partly a matter of circumstance, the right object found at the right time and promoted by the right people. Other anomalous artifacts have faded into obscurity, remembered only by specialists and enthusiasts. The hammer endures in the public imagination, a touchstone for debates about history, science, and the nature of knowledge. Let your mind wander through this gallery of mysteries, these objects that seem to defy explanation. Picture the spark plug in its shell of hardened mineral, the ancient mechanism corroded by centuries beneath the sea, the hammer wrapped in its cocoon of stone. Each object tells a story, not just about itself, but about the human beings who found it, studied it, debated it, and tried to make sense of it. The objects are interesting, but the human response to them is perhaps more interesting still. The night deepens, and the anomalies of the world seem to multiply in the darkness. Every shadow might conceal a mystery. Every stone might hold a secret. This is the enchantment of anomalous artifacts, the way they awaken us to the strangeness that lurks at the edges of the familiar. The world is not fully known, not fully mapped, not fully explained. There are still surprises waiting for those who take the time to look. Let's rest now with this sense of wonder, this openness to the unknown. The London hammer and its cousins in the Gallery of Anomalies remind us that curiosity is one of the great gifts of human consciousness, the capacity to notice what does not fit and to ask why. Whether the answers turn out to be mundane or extraordinary, the asking is valuable in itself. A celebration of the inquiring mind that has carried our species from the caves to the stars. The story continues, but the night grows deeper, and the mysteries grow quieter. Let the questions settle into the background of your thoughts, present but not pressing, companions for the journey into sleep. The anomalous artifacts of the world will still be there in the morning, waiting to be examined and debated and wondered at. For now, let them rest, and let yourself rest with them. Cradled in the gentle darkness of a world that still has secrets to reveal. In a small building along a quiet road in Glen Rose, Texas, the London hammer has found its permanent home. The Creation Evidence Museum sits in the shadow of Dinosaur Valley State Park, where ancient trackways preserved in limestone draw visitors from around the world to walk in the footsteps of creatures that vanished millions of years ago. The juxtaposition is striking. A museum dedicated to challenging mainstream geology, located just minutes from one of the most famous geological sites in the American Southwest. It is here that the hammer rests in its display case, waiting for the next curious visitor to peer through the glass and ponder its mysteries. The museum itself is modest in scale, but ambitious in scope. Its exhibits present what its founders consider evidence against the conventional scientific understanding of Earth's history, offering alternative interpretations that align with a young Earth creationist worldview. Dinosaur footprints are displayed alongside what are claimed to be human tracks, suggesting that the two species coexisted rather than being separated by tens of millions of years. Fossils and artifacts are arranged to tell a story different from the one taught in universities and natural history museums, a story in which the Earth is thousands rather than billions of years old. The London hammer occupies a place of honor in this collection, presented as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that the conventional timeline of Earth's history is fundamentally flawed. The display case includes information about the hammer's discovery, its composition, and the claims that have been made about its antiquity. Visitors are invited to draw their own conclusions, though the framing of the exhibit leaves little doubt about what conclusion the museum hopes they will reach. For many visitors, the experience of seeing the hammer in person is powerful and moving. Here is a tangible object, something that can be seen and studied, not just an abstract argument or a theoretical claim. The hammer seems to offer proof that can be touched, evidence that speaks directly to the senses, rather than requiring specialized knowledge or sophisticated instruments to interpret. In a world of competing claims and confusing information, there is something reassuring about an artifact that appears to tell its own story. The visitors who come to the Creation Evidence Museum arrive with a wide variety of backgrounds and motivations. Some are committed young Earth creationists, seeking confirmation of beliefs they already hold and evidence they can use in discussions with skeptics. For these visitors, the hammer is a vindication, a physical manifestation of truths they have always known, but that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. They photograph it, discuss it with their families, and leave feeling strengthened in their convictions. Others come out of curiosity, drawn by the fame of the hammer, or by a general interest in unusual artifacts and alternative explanations. These visitors may or may not share the museum's worldview, but they are intrigued by the mystery and want to see the object for themselves. They examine the display with interest, read the explanatory materials, and form their own judgments about what the hammer means and how it should be interpreted. Some leave convinced, others remain skeptical, and many find themselves somewhere in between, uncertain what to believe. Still others visit with a more critical eye, skeptics and scientists who want to evaluate the claims firsthand. These visitors often note details that the museum's presentation does not emphasize: the lack of rigorous scientific analysis, the alternative explanations that account for the hammer's apparent anomaly, the broader context of creation science and its relationship to mainstream geology. Okay, they may engage museum staff in discussion, asking pointed questions and challenging the interpretations offered. These encounters can be tense or cordial, depending on the personalities involved, but they rarely result in changed minds on either side. The museum staff are generally welcoming and enthusiastic, eager to share their perspective with anyone who's interested. They have heard the skeptical objections many times and have developed responses that satisfy them, if not their critics. They view their work as a mission, an effort to spread truth in a world that has been misled by a scientific establishment committed to materialistic assumptions. The hammer is one of their most effective tools in this mission, a conversation starter that opens doors to deeper discussions about faith, science, and the nature of knowledge. The ongoing debate over the London hammer reflects larger tensions in American culture between religious and secular worldviews, between trust and scientific authority and suspicion of elite institutions, between different ways of knowing and different criteria for evaluating evidence. The hammer has become a symbol in these debates, its meaning extending far beyond its physical reality as a small tool of iron and wood. For some, it represents the arrogance of science, the refusal to consider evidence that challenges established theories. For others, it represents the dangers of motivated reasoning, the tendency to see what we want to see rather than what is actually there. These debates are unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. The same evidence can be interpreted in radically different ways, depending on the assumptions and values that the interpreter brings to the task. Where a mainstream geologist sees a 19th-century tool encased in a recent concretion, a young Earth creationist sees evidence that the geological timescale is fundamentally wrong. Neither side finds the other's arguments persuasive because they are working from different premises and seeking different kinds of truth. What the hammer cannot do is settle these debates on its own. It is an object, not an argument, and objects do not interpret themselves. The meaning of the hammer depends on the framework within which it is placed, the questions that are asked about it, the standards of evidence that are applied. Change the framework, and the meaning changes as well. This is true, not just of the London hammer, but of all evidence, all artifacts, all observations. We do not encounter raw facts, but always facts as interpreted through the lens of our existing beliefs and assumptions. This does not mean that all interpretations are equally valid, or that truth is simply a matter of perspective. Some interpretations fit the evidence better than others, account for more observations, make more accurate predictions, and cohere more successfully with what we know from other sources. The scientific interpretation of the London hammer, which sees it as a recent artifact in a recent concretion, has these virtues. It explains the observed features of the hammer without requiring us to overturn vast bodies of well-established knowledge. It is parsimonious, consistent, and supported by our understanding of how concretions form, but science cannot compel belief. It can only offer its best explanations and invite others to evaluate them on their merits. Those who are committed to alternative frameworks will continue to find the scientific explanations unsatisfying, will continue to see in the hammer evidence that confirms their own views. The debate will go on, each side talking past the other, the hammer sitting silently in its case, indifferent to the meanings that human beings project onto it. There is something almost poignant about the hammer's situation. This small tool that has become a battleground for competing worldviews did not ask to be famous, did not seek to become a symbol of anything. It was just a hammer, made for work, used for a time, and then lost. The meanings it now carries were assigned to it by others, layers of interpretation piled on top of its simple physical reality. Beneath all the controversy, it remains what it always was, an implement of iron and wood, shaped by human hands for human purposes. The Creation Evidence Museum will continue to display the hammer, and visitors will continue to come, drawn by curiosity or conviction, or some mixture of the two. The staff will continue to present their interpretation, and skeptics will continue to offer their objections. The debate will evolve as new participants join and old arguments are refined, but the fundamental disagreement is unlikely to disappear. It is rooted in differences too deep to be bridged by any single artifact, no matter how intriguing. As you rest with these thoughts, picture the museum in the quiet Texas evening, its lights dimmed, its displays waiting for tomorrow's visitors. The hammer sits in its case, illuminated by a soft glow, its iron head dark and dense, its wooden handle emerging from the shell of stone that made it famous. It has been photographed thousands of times, discussed in countless conversations, written about in books and articles and websites around the world. And yet, it remains mysterious. Not because we lack information about it, but because information alone cannot settle the questions it raises. The night settles over Glen Rose, over the dinosaur tracks in the nearby park, over the museum with its controversial exhibits. The hammer keeps its silence, as it has for nearly a century. Since the day Max Hahn first picked it up along the banks of Red Creek, it has traveled far since then, not in physical distance, but in meaning and significance. From a curious find to a famous artifact, from a private puzzle to a public symbol. The hammer has taken on a life of its own, independent of whatever history it actually possesses. Let your breathing slow as you contemplate this strange journey. The hammer that was once held by a working hand now rests behind glass, an object of contemplation rather than use. The purposes for which it was made have long since been forgotten, replaced by new purposes that its maker could never have imagined. It has become a vessel for human hopes and fears, a screen onto which we project our deepest questions about the nature of reality and our place within it. The museum will open again tomorrow, and the debates will continue. But for now, in the quiet of the night, the hammer simply is. It does not argue or persuade, does not take sides in the controversies that swirl around it. It simply exists, a small piece of the physical world, waiting to be seen and interpreted by whoever comes to look. There is peace in this simplicity, a reminder that beneath all our arguments and assumptions, the world goes on, patient and indifferent, holding its secrets close. Rest now, with the hammer in its case, with the museum in its quiet evening, with the debates that will resume when morning comes. The story is not over, will perhaps never be over, as long as there are people who wonder about the past and argue about how to understand it. But the night is a time for rest, not argument. And the hammer invites us to set aside our certainties and our doubts alike, to simply be present with the mystery, to let the questions float unanswered in the darkness. The journey continues, but the destination remains unclear. The hammer has not revealed its secrets, and perhaps it never will. What it has revealed is something about ourselves, about our need to understand, our desire for certainty, our willingness to see meaning in the most unlikely places. These are the true mysteries, the enduring puzzles that no artifact can solve. The hammer simply reflects them back to us, a mirror made of iron and wood and stone. We have traveled far together through the story of the London hammer, from the sun-drenched hills of central Texas to the depths of geological time, from the workshops of 19th-century miners to the display cases of a controversial museum. We have examined the hammer from many angles, considered many explanations, and encountered the passions and convictions of those who have made this small artifact a centerpiece of their understanding of the world. Now, as the night deepens and sleep draws near, it is time to gather these threads together and rest with whatever understanding we have found. The evidence, taken as a whole, suggests a story that is fascinating without being miraculous. A hammer, likely made in the 19th century, was lost or discarded along the banks of Red Creek in the Texas Hill Country. Over the decades that followed, mineral-rich groundwater percolated through the sediments where the hammer lay, depositing layer after layer of calcium carbonate around the tool. The resulting concretion gave the hammer an appearance of great antiquity, wrapping it in a shell of stone that seemed to tie it to the ancient limestone formations of the region. When Max Hahn discovered the rock in the 1930s, he had no way of knowing that this natural process of mineralization could occur so rapidly. The apparent impossibility of the find sparked a mystery that has endured for nearly a century. This explanation does not diminish the wonder of the London hammer, but rather redirects it. The processes that created this artifact are themselves remarkable, a testament to the ceaseless activity of the natural world, the slow but powerful work of water and dissolved minerals transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. The hammer did not need to be millions of years old to be worthy of our attention. It's a real story. The story of geological processes operating in historical time is every bit as interesting as the alternative narratives that have been proposed. There is beauty in understanding how the world works and tracing the chains of cause and effect that connect phenomena across scales of time and space. The science of concretions opens a window into the hidden life of the earth. The constant circulation of water through soil and rock, the precipitation and dissolution of minerals, the gradual transformation of landscapes over periods that range from decades to millions of years. The London hammer is a small example of these vast processes, a single object caught up in flows of matter and energy that extend far beyond its modest dimensions. At the same time, we must acknowledge the limits of our certainty. The hammer has not been subjected to the kind of rigorous, peer-reviewed scientific analysis that would settle the question of its origins definitively. The claims made about its iron composition, the age of its encasing rock, and the nature of its wooden handle remain contested, with different investigators reaching different conclusions depending on their methods and assumptions. We are confident that the mundane explanation is correct, but we cannot claim absolute proof. In science, as in life, certainty is rare, and the honest inquirer must learn to live with degrees of probability rather than final answers. This uncertainty is not a weakness, but a strength of the scientific approach. Science advances by questioning, by testing, by remaining open to revision in light of new evidence. The London hammer could, in principle, be shown to be something other than what we have described. New analyses, new discoveries, new ways of understanding geological processes might reveal aspects of the artifact that we have overlooked. This possibility keeps the inquiry alive, prevents the story from closing prematurely, invites future generations to take up the question where we have left it. But probability matters, and the probability that the hammer is an ancient artifact from a lost civilization or evidence that human history extends far beyond its accepted boundaries is very low. The alternative explanations require us to overturn vast bodies of well-established knowledge. To assume that mainstream science has fundamentally misunderstood the history of the Earth and of our species. While such revolutions have happened before and will happen again, they require extraordinary evidence, and the London hammer does not provide it. The mundane explanation fits the facts far better than the extraordinary ones, and that is where our provisional judgment must rest. The allure of mystery is powerful, and there is something in the human spirit that resists the closing of questions, that wants the world to be stranger and more wonderful than our everyday experience suggests. This impulse is valuable. It drives exploration and discovery, pushes us to look beyond the familiar, reminds us that our current understanding is always incomplete, but it must be balanced by a willingness to accept ordinary explanations when they fit the evidence, to recognize that the world can be wonderful without being miraculous, that the natural processes of geology and chemistry are themselves sources of profound beauty and fascination. The London Hammer invites us to hold these two impulses in creative tension. We can appreciate the mystery it represents, the questions it raises, the debates it has inspired, without committing ourselves to explanations that the evidence does not support. We can remain curious and open-minded while also being rigorous and critical. We can enjoy the story of the hammer with all its twists and turns without needing to reach a final verdict that forecloses further inquiry. This is the stance of the mature inquirer, neither credulous nor dismissive, willing to wonder and willing to think. As the night wraps around you and sleep approaches, let this stance settle into your being. The world is full of mysteries, some of which have been solved and some of which remain open. The London Hammer is one small mystery among many, an object that has captured imagination and generated controversy, that has been displayed and debated and pondered by countless minds. It does not need to be resolved tonight. It can remain what it has been for nearly a century, a question mark at the edge of our understanding, an invitation to continued thought. The geological processes that created the hammer's stony shell continue to operate throughout the world, building concretions around new objects, transforming the present into the future's past. Somewhere, right now, water is flowing through sediment, carrying its invisible cargo of dissolved minerals, depositing its patient layers around whatever happens to lie in its path. In 100 years, or 1,000, or 10,000, someone may find one of these new concretions and wonder at the strangeness of an object encased in stone. The cycle continues, indifferent to human curiosity, following its own laws and rhythms. There is comfort in discontinuity, in the knowledge that the processes we have described are not unique or exceptional, but part of the ordinary workings of the planet. The Earth does not care about our debates and controversies, simply does what it does, following the laws of physics and chemistry, transforming matter and energy in patterns that repeat across scales of time too vast for human comprehension. We are brief visitors here, our lives measured in decades, while the Earth measures time in billions of years. And yet, in our brief moment, we have learned to read the rocks, to decipher the fossils, to understand something of the forces that have shaped this world. The London Hammer is a small piece of this larger story, a single artifact that connects us to the geology of Central Texas, to the history of 19th century settlement, to the ongoing debates about how we know what we know. It is not the most important artifact ever found, nor the most mysterious, nor the most beautiful, but it is ours, a puzzle that has been handed down through generations, a question that remains open for anyone who wishes to engage with it. Let your breathing slow as you release the need for final answers. The hammer rests in its case. The museum sleeps in the Texas night, and the debates that have swirled around this small object settle into temporary quiet. Tomorrow, they will resume, as they have for decades, but tonight, there is only stillness, only the gentle rhythm of breath, only the gradual descent into sleep. The hills of Central Texas stand under the stars, as they have stood for millions of years, their limestone bones exposed by the patient work of erosion. Red Creek winds through the landscape, carrying its water toward the Llano River and eventually to the sea, somewhere along its banks. The spot where Max Hahn found his curious rock lies unmarked and unremarkable, just another stretch of creek bed in a land full of such places. The hammer is gone from there, long since removed and displayed for the world to see. But the processes that created its mystery continue, building new concretions, wrapping new objects in shells of stone, creating new puzzles for future generations to discover. The story of the London hammer is, in the end, a story about us, about human beings and our endless need to understand the world we inhabit. We find objects and ask where they came from. We encounter mysteries and seek explanations. We build theories and test them against evidence. We argue and debate and sometimes change our minds. This is what it means to be human, to be creatures of curiosity and reason, of wonder and doubt. The hammer does not care about any of this. It is just an object, a collection of atoms arranged in a particular configuration, following the laws of physics, as all objects must. The meanings we attach to it, the controversies we generate around it, the emotions we feel when we contemplate it, these are all human additions, projections of our own minds onto the indifferent surface of the physical world. And yet, these projections matter. They are how we make sense of our experience, how we navigate a universe that offers no ready-made meanings, how we create the stories that give our lives shape and purpose. Rest now with the London hammer, with all its mysteries and all its mundane explanations, the wonder it inspires and the questions it raises. Let it be a companion for your journey into sleep, a small enigma to carry with you into dreams. The night is long and peaceful, and there is no hurry to arrive at any destination. The hammer will still be there in the morning, waiting in its case, ready to spark new thoughts and new debates. For now, let the thoughts settle like sediment to the bottom of a quiet pool. Let the questions drift like clouds across a darkening sky. Let the mystery be enough. The earth turns slowly beneath the stars, carrying us all toward a new day. The processes that shaped the London hammer continue their patient work, indifferent to our sleeping and our waking, our questions and our answers. The story we have told is just one of countless stories that could be told about this small artifact, one perspective among many, one thread in the vast tapestry of human inquiry. Other stories will be told, other perspectives offered, other threads woven into the pattern. The hammer will endure, as it has endured for nearly a century, waiting for the next curious mind to take up its challenge. Sleep now, and let the mystery carry you into the depths of the night. The London hammer has shared its secrets, or at least the secrets we are able to hear, and now it is time to rest. The Texas hills stand silent under the stars. The museum sleeps, and somewhere in the darkness, the waters of Red Creek continue their ancient flow, carrying memories of the past into the unknown future. The journey is complete, but the questions remain open. This is as it should be. The best mysteries are the ones that stay with us, that become part of the furniture of our minds, that we return to again and again over the years. The London hammer is such a mystery, small enough to hold in one hand, large enough to occupy a lifetime of thought. Carry it with you into sleep, and let it accompany you through whatever dreams may come. The night is deep, the world is wide, and there is always more to wonder about. Good night, and rest well. The hammer keeps its vigil in the darkness, and the earth continues its slow turning, and the story goes on, even as you drift away into the peaceful embrace of sleep.